I want you to picture something with me for a second. You're sitting on your porch on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of ordinary afternoon that doesn't announce itself as anything special. The mail truck rolls by, a neighbor waves. Your knees ache a little the way they always do these days, and you think, this is just another day. And then, folks, a car pulls into your driveway that you don't recognize, and a stranger in a gray suit walks up your porch steps holding a folder full of papers with your name on them. That's how it started for me. On a Tuesday, I will never, ever forget. My name is Robert Callahan. I'm 68 years old, and I've spent almost every one of those years in Cedar Hollow, Kentucky, on 40 acres of land that's been in my family since before I was born. My daddy worked this land. His daddy worked this land. And when my wife Eleanor and I got married 42 years ago, we built our house right here on the ridge, looking out over the valley where the fog sits low in the mornings like a blanket somebody forgot to fold up. Eleanor passed 18 months ago. Cancer took her slow, the way it does sometimes, giving you just enough time to say goodbye and just enough time for it to break your heart twice, once when you know it's coming, and once when it finally comes. Since then, this land hasn't just been where I live. It's been the only place on this earth where I can still find her. Her rose bushes are still out back, the ones she babied every spring. Her rocking chair is still on the porch, and some mornings I swear I can still hear the creak of it, like she's sitting right there beside me, telling me to slow down and drink my coffee before it gets cold. I have 2 children. My son Daniel lives 2 states away with his own family, and we talk on Sundays, mostly about the grandkids and football. And then there's my daughter, Kayla. Kayla stayed close. After Eleanor got sick, Kayla started coming around more and more, bringing groceries, helping with doctor's appointments, sitting with her mother in those last hard months. I was grateful. Lord, I was grateful. Abba, I thought I had raised a daughter with a good heart, a daughter who showed up when it mattered. I was wrong about a lot of things, it turns out. It started so small I almost didn't notice it. A comment here, a comment there. Daddy, this house is too much for you to keep up by yourself. Daddy, have you thought about what happens to all this land someday? I figured she was worried about me, the way children worry about their aging parents, and I loved her for it, even when it stung a little to hear. I told her I was fine. I told her this land wasn't going anywhere, and neither was I. Then, about 4 months ago, she brought a man to dinner. But, younger fella, sharp suit, sharper smile, named himself Todd Whitfield and said he was in real estate development. Said he'd heard about my property from Kayla, said the land along Cedar Ridge was primed for growth, said a resort company was scouting the whole valley for a lake development. Kayla sat right there at my kitchen table, nodding along like she'd rehearsed it, telling me how much money I could make, how I could finally retire proper, take a cruise, stop worrying about the roof that needed fixing. I told them both, kindly as I could, that I wasn't interested. This wasn't a piece of inventory to me. This was Eleanor's rose bushes. This was 40 years of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings, and a life I built with my own 2 hands. Todd smiled that smile again and said he understood, but he left his card anyway. Kayla didn't say much on the drive he took to leave, but I saw something in her face I hadn't seen before. Something tight, something disappointed in me, like I'd failed some kind of test. The offers kept coming after that, each one a little more insistent than the last, always funneled through Kayla like she was some kind of go-between. And each time, the number got a little higher, and each time I noticed the number was still an insult compared to what 40 acres on a ridge with lake access ought to be worth. I started to understand that this wasn't about my well-being at all. This was about a payday, and my daughter had found herself a partner in Todd Whitfield to help her collect it. Daddy, be reasonable, she told me one evening, standing in my kitchen with her arms crossed, looking at me like I was the unreasonable one. You're 68. You can't maintain 40 acres forever. What happens when you fall and can't get up? What happens when you can't drive to town anymore? You're going to end up in a nursing home anyway, and this land is just going to sit here rotting. That NDU. This land isn't rotting, Kayla, I said. It's the only place I have left of your mother. Her jaw tightened, the same way her mother's used to when she was holding back words she'd regret. Mom's gone, Daddy. She's not in the rose bushes. She's not in the porch swing. She's gone. and you need to stop pretending this house is some kind of shrine." Those words landed like a slap. I stood there in my own kitchen, in the house I built, and I felt something crack open in my chest that hadn't cracked since the day we buried Eleanor. I told Kayla it was time for her to go home, and she did, but not before telling me that I was going to regret being so stubborn. I didn't hear from her for almost 3 weeks after that. No calls, no visits, nothing. Daniel called from out of state, worried, said Kayla had told him I was getting difficult and not thinking clearly. I sat on that porch a lot during those weeks, in Eleanor's rocking chair, wondering if I actually was losing my grip on things, wondering if my own daughter was right and I was just a stubborn old fool holding on to dirt because I was too scared to let go of the past. I thought about Eleanor a lot during that time. I thought about the day we closed on this land, how she stood right there where the porch is now, spun around with her arms wide open, and said, "Robert Callahan, we are going to grow old right here, and we are going to be happy, and nothing is ever going to take that away from us." I made her a promise that day, and I intended to keep it, no matter what my daughter thought of me for it. I just never imagined how far Kayla was willing to go to break that promise for me. It was a Thursday morning, early October, the kind of crisp fall morning where the valley fog hangs thick until about 9 o'clock. I got up same as always, made my coffee, let the dog out, and walked toward the front door to get the newspaper off the porch. And when I opened that door, my coffee mug near slipped right out of my hand. There, blocking the entire length of my gravel driveway, was a construction dump truck the kind hauling company uses to move gravel and dirt for road jobs parked sideways, completely sealing off the only way in or out of my property. On either side of my driveway is nothing but a steep drainage ditch on one side and a fence line into Old Man Pruitt's cattle pasture on the other. There was no getting a vehicle around that truck. None. My first thought, God help me, was that some driver had broken down, or gotten lost, or made some terrible mistake. But then I saw Kayla's car parked just beyond it, and I saw her stepping out of the passenger side of that truck, and next to her, climbing down from the driver's seat, was Todd Whitfield, wearing work boots and jeans instead of his usual suit, like he'd dressed for the occasion of trapping an old man in his own house. "Kayla," I said, my voice not quite steady, "what in God's name is this?" She walked toward the edge of the yard, arms crossed, and there wasn't a trace of the little girl I raised left in her eyes. "This is me, trying to help you see reason, Daddy. You've had 4 months to think about this the easy way. You can't block a man's driveway, Kayla. That's against the law. Plus." Todd stepped up beside her, that same sharp smile from my kitchen table plastered across his face. "Mr. Callahan, technically it's a private easement dispute. Could take weeks to sort out in court. Weeks you'll be spending right here, unable to get your truck out, unable to get groceries, unable to get to your doctor's appointments." He said it, so calm, so pleasant, like he was discussing the weather instead of holding a man hostage on his own land. I stood there on my porch, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't some contractor's mistake. My own daughter had come to my home with a stranger to trap me here until I broke. "You don't have to live like this, Daddy," Kayla called out, and for 1 second, just one, I thought I heard something like guilt cracking through her voice. "No. Sign the papers Todd has for you, and we'll move the truck this afternoon. It's that simple. You get to keep living comfortably. We handle the sale. Everybody wins. Everybody except me," I said. "This is extortion, Kayla. Do you understand what you're doing?" Her face hardened again, whatever crack I'd heard sealing back up. "I'm doing what needs to be done. You won't listen when I try to be reasonable. So now, we do it the hard way. I've got Todd's crew ready to bring in more equipment if we need to. This isn't going anywhere until you sign." I felt the ground shift under me the same way it had felt the day the doctor told us about Eleanor's diagnosis, that particular kind of dread where your whole world rearranges itself in an instant and nothing looks the way it did 5 minutes ago. I looked at my daughter's face, searching for some sign of the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap during Sunday sermons, and there was nothing there but a stranger wearing her features. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice cracking despite myself. "What happened to you?" End quote. Something flickered behind her eyes for just a moment, but Todd put a hand on her shoulder, and whatever it was disappeared. "The world's changed, Daddy. People have to look out for themselves. I've got debts you don't even know about. I've got a life I'm trying to build, and you're sitting on 40 acres worth more than anything I'll ever earn, refusing to help your own daughter. So there it was. Not concern for my well-being at all. Debt, desperation, dressed up as love. I'm not signing anything, I told her, standing up as straight as my old back would let me. You can leave that truck sitting there till the tires rot off. I am not giving up this land. I am. Todd's pleasant expression finally slipped. Suit yourself, old man. We've got all the time in the world. 7. You've got no way out, no phone signal out here worth a damn. And from what Kayla tells me, you don't exactly have a crowd of people checking in on you these days. He looked at Kayla with something like satisfaction. You told me he pushed everybody away after his wife passed. Guess we'll see how long a man can hold out completely alone. They were right about one thing, and it cut deeper than anything else they'd said. Since Eleanor died, I had pulled inward. I'd stopped going to church suppers. I'd stopped calling my old fishing buddies. I had built myself a quiet, lonely little world up here on this ridge, and my own daughter had studied that loneliness like a weakness to exploit. I went back inside, closed the door, and stood in my kitchen with my hands shaking. I thought about calling the sheriff's office on my landline, but then I remembered with a sinking feeling that the line had gone down in a storm 2 weeks earlier, and I still hadn't gotten around to calling the phone company to fix it. Another piece of my isolation, coming back to bite me at the worst possible moment. My cell phone, useless up here on the ridge where the signal barely reached 1 bar on a good day, showed nothing but a blinking, no service, in the corner. I paced that kitchen for what felt like an hour, my mind racing through everything and nothing, and then I thought of Eleanor's old ham radio. It had been her father's, an old relic she kept in the hall closet more out of sentiment than use, a heavy black box with dials and switches I barely understood. Eleanor's daddy had been an operator for 40 years, and she'd kept his license current out of respect, renewing it every year even after he passed, sometimes chatting with old-timers on Sunday afternoons just to feel close to him. I hadn't touched that thing since she died. I wasn't even sure it still worked. I pulled it down from the closet shelf with trembling hands, blew the dust off the dials, and plugged it into the wall. And first, the little indicator light flickered, then held steady, orange and glowing, like a small miracle. I didn't know the first thing about operating it properly, but I remembered Eleanor mentioning an emergency frequency once, something the local operators monitored around the clock for exactly this kind of situation: folks stranded, folks in trouble, folks with no other way to call for help. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work the dial. I found the frequency scrawled in Eleanor's careful handwriting on a card taped inside the radio's case, and I pressed the button and said the only thing I could think to say. This is Robert Callahan on Cedar Ridge Road. I need help. My daughter and another man have blocked my driveway and won't let me leave. And I doesn't let me let. Please, somebody, if you can hear this, I need help. Static. Nothing but static for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only 30 seconds. And then, crackling through that old speaker, a voice. Cedar Ridge, this is Walt Denny, I copy you. Robert Callahan, is that you? This is Walt. Used to fish with your daddy years back. I nearly dropped the radio right there on my kitchen floor. Walt Denny. I hadn't thought about that man in 15 years, but Eleanor used to talk to him on Sunday afternoons, an old widower 2 towns over who still ran his radio every single day, out of habit and loneliness, the same way some folks keep the television on just to hear another voice in the house. Walt, it's Robert. I need help. My driveway's blocked, I can't get out, and I think my own daughter is trying to force me into signing over my land. There was a pause, and I could hear the disbelief in Walt's voice when he spoke again. Lord Almighty, Robert, hang tight. I'm calling the county sheriff myself right now, and I'm getting in my truck. I know exactly where you are. I sat down at my kitchen table with that old radio still glowing on the counter, and I put my face in my hands and I cried, not from sadness, but from something closer to disbelief that Eleanor, even gone 18 months, had somehow reached back through time and left me exactly the lifeline I needed. The wait after that was the longest 40 minutes of my life. I watched from my front window as Kayla and Todd sat on the tailgate of that dump truck, laughing about something, so confident in their little plan that they never once looked worried. I watched the fog burn off the valley, watched the sun climb higher, and I prayed harder than I'd prayed since the night before Eleanor's surgery that Walt had really meant what he said. Then I heard it. Sirens, faint at first, then closer, climbing up the ridge road from the county highway. I watched Kayla's face change from smug confidence to pale confusion as two sheriff's cruisers came around the bend, followed by Walt Denny's old pickup truck bringing up the rear like he'd appointed himself an honorary deputy for the day. The deputies got out slow and steady, hands resting near their belts, taking in the scene, the dump truck blocking the drive, the old man standing on his porch, the young woman, and the sharp-dressed stranger frozen by the tailgate. One deputy, a broad-shouldered man with a gray mustache, walked toward Todd first. "This your truck blocking this driveway?" Todd tried that same easy smile he'd used on me. "Officer, this is just a family property dispute. There's no need for..." Classed as. That's not what dispatch received. "We got a call about an elderly man being held against his will on his own property. That true, sir?" the deputy asked, looking past Todd straight at me. I stepped down off my porch, my legs still shaking, but my voice steadier than I expected it to be. "It's true. My daughter and this man blocked my driveway this morning and told me I wouldn't get it moved until I signed over my land. I've got no working phone, no way out, and they knew it. First a very..." Kayla's face crumbled in a way that almost made me feel something other than anger. "Daddy, we weren't trying to hurt you. I just wanted you to listen." "By trapping me?" I said, and my voice broke on the words. "By using everything your mother and I built to threaten me?" The deputy with the gray mustache turned to Todd, his tone hardening. "Sir, unlawful imprisonment and coercion are serious charges in this state, family dispute or not. I'm going to need to see some identification from both of you, and that truck needs to be moved right now." Todd's composure finally cracked wide open, his hands starting to shake as the second deputy pulled out a notepad. "This is insane. This is a civil matter. You can't possibly." "I can, and I will," the deputy said flatly. "Turn around, sir." I watched them cuff Todd Whitfield right there in my own front yard, watched the fear finally replace the arrogance on his face. But it was watching my daughter, watching the deputies separate her for questioning, watching her cry into her hands on the tailgate of that truck she'd used to try and break me that hollowed me out in a way I wasn't prepared for. Whatever anger I had didn't disappear, but it sat right alongside a grief I hadn't expected. Grief for the daughter I thought I'd raised and the one standing in my driveway that morning were not the same person, and I didn't know if they ever could be again. Kayla wasn't arrested that day, not with the same charges Todd faced, but the investigation that followed uncovered exactly what I feared. Todd Whitfield had been circling desperate landowners across 3 counties for over a year, using family members like Kayla, people drowning in debt, to pressure aging parents into predatory sales, then flipping the land to development companies for enormous profit. Kayla wasn't his first, and she wouldn't have been his last, if Walt Denny hadn't answered an old radio call from a man he hadn't spoken to in 15 years. Todd pleaded guilty to coercion and unlawful restraint and was sentenced to 3 years. Kayla, facing her own charges for her role in it, took a plea deal that spared her prison time but left her with a felony record, 5 years of probation, and a mountain of restitution to pay back to 2 other families Todd had roped her into helping target. I didn't speak to my daughter for almost 4 months after that morning. I sat on my porch in Eleanor's rocking chair more evenings than I can count, staring out at land that no longer felt entirely safe to me, wondering how a person raises a child with love and still loses her somewhere along the way to debt and desperation and a stranger's smooth talk. It was Daniel, my son, who finally convinced me to see her. He drove down from out of state, sat with me on that porch, and told me something that stuck with me. "Dad, she did something unforgivable. Nobody's arguing that, but she's still drowning. And cutting her off completely just means she drowns alone, the same way you almost did before you found that radio." So I went to see her. She was renting a small apartment above the hardware store in town by then, having sold her house to help pay restitution. She looked smaller than I remembered, worn down in a way that had nothing to do with her age. She cried before I even got a word out, apologizing over and over, telling me about the debt Todd had helped her run up trying to keep pace with a life she couldn't afford, about how easy it had been to convince herself that taking my land was somehow helping both of us. I won't pretend it was a simple conversation or that I walked out of there with my heart fully healed. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't a door that swings open in one afternoon. It's something you walk through a little further every single day, sometimes taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But I told her that day that I loved her, that I would always love her, and that if she was willing to do the hard work of earning back my trust, I was willing to let her try. These days, almost 2 years on from that Thursday morning, Kayla comes up to the ridge most Sunday afternoons. She's working 2 jobs to pay off what she owes, and she's in counseling, working through whatever it was that made her believe stealing from her own father was somehow a solution instead of a betrayal. We don't talk about that morning much, but sometimes, when we're sitting on the porch watching the fog roll into the valley the way Eleanor and I used to watch it, I catch her looking out at the land like she finally understands what it actually meant. Not as an asset, but as a life, our life, stitched together thread by thread over 40 years. I still keep that old ham radio on the kitchen counter now, plugged in, the little orange light glowing day and night. Walt Denny and I talk most Sunday evenings, an old habit neither of us wants to break. I never got to properly thank Eleanor for leaving me that lifeline, tucked away in a hall closet, waiting for the one morning I'd need it most, but I like to think she knew. I like to think some part of her was still looking out for this land, and for me, long after she was gone. I don't know exactly what the future holds for me and my daughter. I don't know if we'll ever get all the way back to what we were before that morning the dump truck blocked my driveway and a stranger stood in my yard with a folder full of papers. But I know we're trying. I know healing, real healing, is slow and unglamorous, and doesn't happen the way it does in the movies, all at once, with a single tearful hug. So, if you're out there tonight, and someone you love has hurt you in a way you never thought was possible, someone who was supposed to protect you instead of prey on you, I want you to hear this from an old man who's been exactly where you are. Isolation makes us vulnerable in ways we don't see until somebody exploits it. But it doesn't have to be permanent. Reach out to somebody, anybody, before you find yourself standing in your own kitchen with no working phone and no way to call for help. And if healing is ever offered to you, even in the smallest, most imperfect way, don't be too proud or too hurt to take it. The land is still mine. The rose bushes still bloom every spring. And some evenings, sitting in Eleanor's chair with my daughter beside me and the fog rolling soft across the valley, I believe, truly believe, that love, the real kind, the kind that survives even our worst mistakes, is still out there waiting for every single one of us to find our way back to it.